Before anything else unfolds, please comment where they are watching from and subscribe for more stories like this. Because what follows is not just about combat, but about pride, identity, and assumptions that travel faster than truth. The story begins with Rafael Monteiro, a celebrated Brazilian champion whose reputation in full-contact competition stretched across continents. Rafael was known not only for victories, but for confidence that bordered on dismissal. During a widely shared international interview, he laughed openly when Filipino Eskrima was mentioned, calling it outdated and ineffective in real fighting. The comment was casual, almost playful, but it landed heavily. Clips spread within hours, replayed with disbelief and quiet anger. For Rafael, it was another moment of bravado from a champion accustomed to applause. For many Filipinos watching, it felt personal. What no one realized then was that those few careless words were about to follow Rafael into a confrontation that would challenge everything he believed about dominance and control. Online reactions exploded, yet the most significant response did not come from comment sections. In a modest training hall in Davao, Elias Navarro watched the clip without expression. He was not famous, undefeated, or outspoken. Elias had trained in Eskrima since childhood, shaped by instructors who valued awareness over aggression. He had heard such mockery before from foreigners and locals alike, dismissing Filipino systems as impractical. Instead of responding online, Elias returned to training, repeating drills that emphasized timing and restraint. He believed that systems forged through survival rarely advertised themselves loudly. As debates raged online, Elias received a message from an old mentor who now worked with international martial arts exhibitions. A cross-discipline showcase was being organized, aimed at testing perceptions rather than selling hype. Elias's name was on a short list. He hesitated, understanding what representation demanded. This was not about proving superiority. It was about allowing assumptions to meet reality without theatrics. Rafael, meanwhile, remained unfazed by the reaction. He had faced criticism before and believed outrage only amplified relevance. Interviews continued, and he doubled down subtly, emphasizing strength, pressure, and dominance as the true measures of fighting. His team encouraged the confidence, reminding him that champions were built through assertion, not diplomacy. When the exhibition invitation arrived, Rafael accepted immediately. He requested no specific opponent, stating that style mattered less than mindset. Training intensified, focused on power and control. Rafael believed experience alone would dictate the outcome. What he failed to notice was how the narrative was shifting quietly. This was no longer about promoting Brazilian prowess. It was becoming a test of underestimation. Across the ocean, Elias finally accepted the invitation, not with excitement, but with clarity. The moment had arrived not because Rafael mocked Eskrima, but because such moments always arrived eventually for those willing to wait. Elias's decision was met with cautious support from family and peers. They understood the risk, but also the meaning. Training intensified, not toward spectacle, but refinement. Elias focused on distance, timing, and awareness. He studied Rafael's fights not to imitate, but to understand habits. He noticed that Rafael thrived when opponents matched aggression, but slowed when rhythm was disrupted. Elias adjusted accordingly. He was not preparing to embarrass anyone. He was preparing to demonstrate that effectiveness did not require excess. When the matchup was announced, reactions poured in. Most expected Rafael to dominate quickly. Few recognized Elias's name. The imbalance fed anticipation perfectly. Rafael smiled when he saw the announcement, seeing validation rather than challenge. The world leaned forward, unaware that assumptions were about to be tested in ways words could never survive. As the event approached, pressure grew unevenly. Rafael faced questions about age and adaptability, dismissing them confidently. Elias carried quieter pressure, representing not just himself, but a tradition often misunderstood. Friends reminded him that conduct mattered as much as outcome. Elias internalized that truth, focusing on composure rather than result. Raphael's camp released footage emphasizing power and aggression, reinforcing inevitability. Online debates framed the matchup as certainty versus curiosity. Yet within Elias's camp, calm prevailed. He had not prepared because of Raphael's mockery, but because preparation was constant. History had taught him that respect was often earned silently, then recognized too late. When the encounter began, expectations shaped perception more than reality. Raphael pressed forward immediately, imposing rhythm and pressure. Elias absorbed, adjusted, observed. Some mistook restraint for hesitation. Others noticed measurement. As minutes passed, Raphael's attacks intensified but grew predictable. Elias's responses remained economical. Each exchange shifted balance subtly. Raphael remained confident, but curiosity crept in. This was not unfolding as planned. Elias remained composed, unbroken, attentive. The audience sensed change before understanding it. The narrative that fueled anticipation began unraveling quietly, steadily, without announcing. Midway through, Raphael attempted to reassert dominance, relying on instinct forged through years of victory. Elias responded with precision rather than defiance. Timing disrupted rhythm. Distance denied control. Hesitation appeared, subtle but undeniable. Raphael was thinking rather than dictating. Elias never attempted to overpower, only to outlast and outthink. Frustration surfaced. Raphael was not losing, but no longer commanding. Confidence became weight. Elias remained anchored, executing exactly what he had trained for. The realization spread slowly. This was never about softness. It was about assumptions colliding with resistance they were never designed to withstand. As the final moments approached, tension replaced certainty. Raphael surged again, driven by pride. Elias met him with calm control. When it ended, there was no collapse, no humiliation, only something far more unsettling. Raphael stood breathing heavily, recalibrating. Elias stood composed, respectful. The decision came without controversy, but silence preceded applause. Not because of shock, but because narrative had failed. Raphael was not defeated, but challenged deeply. Elias had not chased victory, but revealed truth. Words spoken weeks earlier echoed differently. What shocked everyone was not outcome, but exposure. Afterward, Raphael spoke briefly, stripped of bravado. He acknowledged Elias's discipline without qualifiers. Not an apology, but recognition. Elias responded respectfully, crediting experience and preparation. Clips circulated again, framed differently. Commentators shifted tone. Filipinos watching felt validation without celebration. Elias returned home quietly. Raphael returned with questions. Neither claimed transformation, yet both were changed. The aftermath expanded slowly, reshaping conversations about strength and identity. Weeks later, Raphael avoided interviews, revisiting fundamentals privately. Elias declined attention, returning to teaching. The phrase outdated became shorthand for underestimation. Analysts reframed the encounter as lesson rather than rivalry. What shocked the world was not challenge, but how it arrived without hostility. The aftermath continued unfolding across borders and disciplines. Months later, Raphael reemerged publicly, though something in his presence had shifted. He remained respected and physically imposing, but the certainty that once framed his statements had softened into reflection. When asked about Eskrima, he no longer dismissed it. He spoke instead about preparation, adaptability, and the danger of mistaking familiarity for superiority. Some fans resisted this change, preferring the sharper, louder champion they had celebrated. Others listened more carefully than before. Elias followed these developments from a distance, never responding publicly. In his training hall, the story was framed not as an upset, but as a lesson in patience. Students trained with renewed belief, understanding that recognition often arrived late, while readiness had to arrive early. What began as mockery was now reshaping confidence quietly on both sides, influencing how fighters thought about strength, humility, and the unseen value of discipline accumulated over time. Promoters attempted to replicate the moment, pairing fighters under similar narratives, hoping controversy would manufacture authenticity. Most failed. What made the encounter endure was sincerity. Raphael had believed his assumptions. Elias had believed in preparation. That collision could not be staged. Analysts revisiting the exchange focused less on techniques and more on decision-making. Elias's restraint became a case study. Raphael's adjustment under pressure became another. Coaches referenced the event when warning athletes about underestimation. Online discourse matured. The phrase outdated lost its sting, transformed into caution. Younger fighters trained with intention rather than imitation. Raphael noticed students questioning respectfully. Elias noticed students trusting quiet work. The aftermath altered behavior rather than headlines, proving that real influence rarely announces itself loudly, but reshapes habits slowly, persistently, and across boundaries no single event can fully define. Years later, the footage remained widely viewed, often paused at subtle shifts in momentum. New viewers sensed importance even without context. There was no dominance, yet the tension felt instructive. Raphael's early confidence, Elias's steady composure, the gradual recalibration of expectation. Commentators framed it as narrative collapse rather than rivalry. Elias accepted occasional invitations to speak, focusing on humility instead of victory. Raphael referenced the experience as a turning point, not because he lost, but because he learned. This honesty resonated beyond combat sports. Leaders and educators drew parallels. The story transcended fighting, becoming a reminder that certainty untested breeds fragility. What shocked everyone was not a result, but realization unfolding in real time, preserved permanently and revisited whenever assumptions met disciplined resistance. As generations shifted, the story took on quieter life. It was no longer trending, yet steadily referenced. Elias continued training, refining principles meant to outlast attention. Raphael continued teaching, balancing tradition with inquiry. When they crossed paths years later at a closed seminar, there were no cameras, no announcements. Their exchange was brief, respectful, almost ordinary. That simplicity reflected how far the moment had traveled. The mockery that once defined headlines had become irrelevant. What remained was mutual recognition. Neither claimed ownership of the story. They understood that lessons outgrew individuals. Students observing from afar absorbed the truth. Preparation humbles arrogance. Discipline outlasts noise. The shock remembered worldwide was merely the first visible sign of a longer transformation still unfolding quietly wherever assumptions encountered Patty. In Filipino gyms, the story was often told without naming Raphael. It became an example of mindset. Trainers emphasized that being overlooked could sharpen focus rather than diminish worth. Elias's path mirrored countless untold journeys. Fighters trained without expectation of recognition, yet ready if it arrived. In Brazil, Raphael's evolution influenced peers comfortable in dominance. Conversations shifted from legacy to longevity, from image to adaptability. Younger athletes questioned hierarchies respectfully, encouraged by Raphael's openness. This ripple extended far beyond the original encounter. The aftermath connected communities, rather than dividing them. What shocked everyone endured because it revealed something universal. Strength measured only by reputation collapses. Strength grounded in preparation adapts. That understanding shaped how fighters approached both opponents and themselves. Critics occasionally reframed the exchange as inconclusive. They missed the point. Impact was never about declarations. It was exposure. Exposure of assumptions, blind spots, humility as advantage. Elias ignored debates, choosing silence. Raphael addressed them once, stating discomfort often began growth. The comment circulated widely. Schools referenced the story in discussions of bias. Coaches used it to warn against complacency. The mockery that sparked everything seemed insignificant compared to dialogue it produced. The shock evolved into recognition, repeating quietly whenever someone reconsidered toughness stripped of theatrics and measured through sustained pressure and awareness. As media cycles shifted, the story settled into institutional memory. It appeared in panels, manuals, forums focused on mindset. Elias became associated with composure. Raphael with evolution. Neither identity was forced. Fighters who never saw the footage still absorbed its influence through those they trained under. The lesson traveled indirectly, giving it strength. No reinforcement was needed. Principles spoke through behavior. What followed the mockery continued unfolding without announcement. Each time preparation triumphed over bravado, the story echoed. Each time dismissal backfired, the lesson resurfaced. The shock lived not in memory, but application, shaping decisions long after noise faded. Elias later reflected privately on the moment that changed his visibility. Opportunity mattered less than readiness. Raphael reached the same conclusion differently. Opportunity without humility had limits. These parallel realizations anchored the story's depth. Neither became entirely new. They became sharper versions of themselves. That precision resonated. Across Southeast Asia and South America, fighters trained more seriously. Understanding perception was unreliable. Respect had to be earned repeatedly. The shock matured into awareness. The world had not witnessed downfall. It witnessed recalibration. Recalibration, though quieter, proved more influential than spectacle. As years passed, new fighters emerged, new controversies rose. Few endured. This story persisted because it resisted simplification. It offered no hero, no villain, only consequence. Elias lived modestly, teaching discipline. Raphael mentored adaptability. Neither spoke of redemption. They spoke of responsibility. Responsibility to prepare, listen, remain open. The mockery transformed into lesson repeated without attribution. That anonymity strengthened reach. The shock was no longer tied to a night. It became shared understanding passed quietly from mentor to student. Observers noted restraint as key to endurance. There was no escalation beyond necessity. No exploitation. That restraint allowed authenticity. Elias refusing attention preserved credibility. Raphael evolving preserved respect. Their choices shaped aftermath. Instead of polarizing, the encounter unified around shared values. Discipline, preparation, humility. These transcended styles and borders. Shock captured attention because it contradicted expectation. It endured because it aligned with truth. Whenever fighters questioned imposed narratives, the story resurfaced, reminding them readiness never announced itself. It revealed itself only when tested. D. Influence extended into other fields. Coaches referenced it when addressing teams. Educators used it to illustrate bias. Leaders cited it when warning against dismissive authority. Elias and Raphael became archetypes rather than names. Underestimated practitioner. Established authority confronting limitation. Universality allowed adaptation. Mockery seemed trivial, almost necessary. Without it, lesson might not surface. Shock marked moment perception cracked. What followed filled that crack with understanding. That process unfolded wherever certainty met experience. C. When Raphael eventually stepped away from competition, his farewell carried a tone few expected. He spoke less about titles and more about moments that had forced him to listen instead of assert. Those who followed his career understood the reference without it being named. The mockery that once fueled attention had been replaced by perspective earned through discomfort. Elias continued training without ceremony, teaching fundamentals to students who often did not know the full story. He believed consistency mattered more than recognition. Their parallel paths reflected the same truth from opposite directions. Growth rarely arrived with applause. It arrived through challenge that unsettled certainty. The world had already been shocked once. It did not need repetition. The lesson had embedded itself deeply enough to travel on its own. Wherever fighters questioned assumptions, the encounter resurfaced quietly, reminding them that mastery was not a destination claimed publicly, but a responsibility renewed daily through preparation, restraint, and respect shaped over tea. As documentaries revisited the encounter years later, the tone shifted from spectacle to reflection. Analysts focused on how narratives shaped expectation and how reality often resisted those frames. Elias appeared briefly in one such piece, repeating a simple idea that preparation was the only element fully within control. Raphael echoed that sentiment elsewhere, reinforcing the story's integrity without coordination. The shock no longer required footage to feel relevant. It lived in conversation, training habits, and silence where arrogance once spoke freely. Fighters who never watched the original exchange still absorbed its lesson through mentors who had. The story endured because it demanded no exaggeration. It revealed how quickly certainty could falter when challenged respectfully. What followed the mockery was not revenge or triumph, but understanding that settled slowly. That understanding reshaped how strength was discussed, measured, and pursued long after the cameras stopped recording. In smaller gyms far from international stages, the story continued traveling without names or headlines. Trainers shared it quietly when students felt overlooked or doubted their path. Underestimation was reframed as a test rather than an insult. Young athletes learned to train longer, listen more carefully, and speak less about potential. Coaches explained that confidence built on reputation was fragile, while confidence built on work endured pressure. The encounter became a reference point when frustration surfaced, reminding fighters that progress was rarely visible while it was happening. What once stunned the world had settled into practice, shaping habits instead of arguments. The aftermath matured beyond memory. It lived in patience under pressure, in composure during challenge, and in the quiet refusal to seek validation before readiness had earned the right to speak through action rather than explanation. As martial arts continued evolving across borders, the lesson gained renewed relevance. Styles blended, rules adapted, and fighters trained with broader perspectives than previous generations. Within that evolution, the story functioned as a quiet anchor, reminding practitioners why humility mattered. Elias's composure and Raphael's recalibration symbolized a shift away from dominance narratives toward learning narratives. Gyms that once emphasized intimidation began emphasizing understanding. Competition remained intense, but arrogance carried consequences. The encounter was no longer cited for controversy, but for clarity. It showed that effectiveness could not be ranked by origin, reputation, or volume. What shocked audiences initially had transformed into sustained dialogue, influencing how fighters prepared mentally as much as physically. The story's flow continued forward, not frozen in a single night, but moving naturally with the sport itself as each generation absorbed the lesson differently. When asked years later what truly endured from that moment, Elias spoke simply about preparation and restraint. He explained that silence, when supported by work, often carried more weight than argument. Raphael echoed a similar thought elsewhere, saying humility preserved relevance longer than pride preserved status. Their reflections mirrored each other without coordination, reinforcing the lesson's authenticity. The mockery that once defined the narrative now felt distant, almost insignificant. What mattered was the response and the discipline shaping it. The story no longer depended on conflict, but continuity. It lived in how fighters approached training, opponents, and themselves. Each retelling softened outrage and sharpened responsibility. What had shocked the world evolved into understanding, proving that the most lasting impacts rarely arrived with noise, but through quiet shifts in perspective repeated consistently across cultures, generations, and disciplines over time. The story refused a traditional ending, choosing continuity instead of closure. Elias remained in training halls, refining fundamentals and teaching awareness to those willing to listen. Raphael continued mentoring, balancing tradition with curiosity and experience with adaptation. Their paths crossed occasionally, briefly, without ceremony, shaped by mutual respect rather than rivalry. The exchange that once dominated discussion now served as a reference, not an identity. It reminded practitioners that growth was ongoing, not claimed in a single moment. Each time assumptions were challenged through discipline, the story resurfaced. Each time restraint proved stronger than bravado, its meaning deepened. What once shocked the world became a guidepost rather than a headline. The flow carried forward naturally, grounded in practice, patience, and the understanding that mastery remained a process shaped by humility rather than a status defended through noise. Over time, the encounter became less about Eskrima or Brazilian competition and more about mindset. Fighters across disciplines referenced it when discussing preparation under pressure. The story endured because it reflected something universal. Confidence built without testing was fragile. Respect earned through experience lasted longer. Elias's silence and Raphael's evolution offered two paths arriving at the same realization. Neither sought to rewrite history. They allowed it to speak honestly. What followed the mockery was not humiliation, but recalibration. That recalibration quietly influenced how strength was defined. Toughness was no longer measured by volume or intimidation, but by composure, awareness, and adaptability. The world had not witnessed a collapse. It had witnessed adjustment. An adjustment, though quieter than spectacle, proved far more influential than dominance ever cowl. As years passed, new fighters rose and new controversies competed for attention. Few endured. This story remained because it resisted simplification. It offered no villain, no hero, only consequence. Elias lived modestly, teaching discipline to students who would one day tell the story themselves. Raphael mentored adaptability to those chasing legacy. Neither spoke of redemption. They spoke of responsibility. Responsibility to prepare, to listen, to remain open. The mockery that once framed headlines had transformed into a lesson repeated without attribution. That anonymity strengthened its reach. The shock was no longer tied to a single night. It became shared understanding passed quietly from coach to student, from experience to insight, wherever confidence encountered reality without protectee. Ultimately, what happened next shocked everyone because it dismantled expectation without spectacle. There was no dramatic humiliation, no manufactured rivalry, no simple victor to celebrate. Instead, there was learning, recalibration, and growth unfolding steadily. The mockery that once drew attention faded, replaced by understanding earned through experience. Raphael's certainty gave way to curiosity, while Elias's silence proved stronger than any rebuttal. Together, their encounter revealed that toughness could not be measured by noise, nationality, or reputation. It emerged through preparation, restraint, and response under pressure. The story endured because it reflected a truth larger than combat. Assumptions fail when tested. Discipline adapts. Respect deepens through challenge. What the world witnessed was not an ending, but a beginning that continued shaping minds long after the moment passed.